Hi, I'm Joan Yellow, and welcome to Smash Course Jacksonian Democracy, where today we will learn about all the things that happened during Andrew Jackson's presidency and how he's affected the United States, starting with the elections of 1824 and 1828. There were three main candidates in the election of 1824, Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, and John Quincy Adams. Though Jackson was not elected president in 1824, he did win the popular vote. John Quincy Adams won the Electoral College vote, and so became the president. Andrew Jackson was not so happy with this outcome, as one might expect after almost becoming president and then losing the determining vote. Jackson accused Adams of corrupt bargain with Clay. He supposed that they had a deal in which Clay would allow Adams to become president in exchange for him making Clay the Secretary of State. Jackson campaigned as the common man, as he didn't come from a position of power or wealth and grew up as any other American citizen. He even had a nickname, Old Hickory, to make himself seem more like an ordinary man. He was born in one of the Carolinas, but from Tennessee. He played a role in the American Revolution and was later in wars against Native American tribes like the Creeks, though he later adopted two Native American boys. The election of 1828 was revolutionary for American democracy because by this time, most property requirements for voting had been removed, which greatly increased the number of people who were able to vote. With the increase in voters, Jackson won by a landslide and ended up serving 2 terms, from 1829 to 1837. Jackson was a member of the newly rising Democratic Party, which favored beliefs of distrust toward the government and harbored philosophies that it favored the rich and powerful. Democrats wanted to extend the right to vote even further, believing that ordinary people should be able to vote and hold public office. After being elected in 1828, Jackson took large advantage of something known as the spoils system. In simple terms, the spoils system allows the president to award members of their political party with government jobs. Jackson did not hesitate to make use of this system, replacing government officials with his supporters at the start of his first term. Now it's time to talk about the Bank War. The Second Bank of America was a private bank kept open by a charter controlled by the government. The bank's directors were not elected, but they had immense power in determining financial matters in the United States, which Jackson pointed out as a flaw. Jackson heavily opposed the National Bank, which ceased to exist in 1836 when he vetoed the renewal of its charter. His opposition of the bank is what led to his re-election in 1832. Farmers and merchants disliked the bank because it limited the amount of money that banks could lend. Without a centralized bank control, however, smaller banks were able to print their own money, which, of course, led to inflation. In response to this issue, Congress passed a law that raised tariffs on manufactured goods. People from the South had suffered because of these tariffs, since their businesses were primarily agricultural, and many of them had to buy imported manufactured goods. These tariffs largely benefited those from the North, however, since their businesses largely created manufactured goods, and these taxes made their products cheaper than imported ones. Vice President John Calhoun from South Carolina argued that states had the right to nullification, or the ability to cancel a federal law that the state feels to be unconstitutional. This issue becomes known as the nullification crisis. The issue with the tariffs comes to a peak when, in 1832, South Carolina threatened to secede from the country if the federal government used force to impose the newly created, even higher tariff that the state had voted to nullify. Jackson was furious at this threat and sent troops to be on alert in South Carolina. Calhoun resigned, and Jackson went to Congress to create 2 new laws: lower the tariffs and collect them by force if necessary. This settles the crisis peacefully and avoids violent conflict. Now on to a less glorious part of Jackson's presidency: Indian removal. There were more than 100,000 Native Americans east of the Mississippi in 1829, which, to government leaders and settlers, was bad news because it meant they wouldn't be able to expand westward. Natives had fertile land, which white farmers wanted for planting cotton, not to mention the gold that had been discovered in Cherokee territory. There were dozens of treaties made with native tribes over the years. Jackson had even been involved with these treaties before his presidency began. He negotiated with southern tribes and exchanged their westward lands for land farther to the east. Andrew Jackson is generally best remembered for his role in Indian removal. Let's head to the thought bubble. Bloop! He signed the Indian Removal Act on May 28, 1830, which authorized the president to grant lands west of the Mississippi in exchange for Indian lands within state borders. Some tribes went along peacefully with this, but many resisted the relocation policy. During the fall and winter of 1838 and 1839, Cherokees were forced to move westward on a march that would later become known as the Trail of Tears, to account for the nearly 4,000 Cherokees that died. Bloop. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Except for a few Seminoles in Florida who resisted the forced move, there remained no natives in the American South by the 1840s. Jackson had adopted 2 Indian children, which feels a bit ironic for a man whose reputation is that of the man who played an enormous role in removing Indians from their homes in the South. Smash Course Jacksonian Democracy is written by Alex Rule, narrated by Alex Rule, and researched by Alex Rule.